Well, now, settle in, folks. This is Bob speaking, and at 70 years old, I've heard my share of stories. But over the next few weeks, I'm going to tell you one of the most remarkable tales in all of human history, the birth of America. And here's my promise to you. This isn't some sanitized textbook version. This is the real story. The anger, the mistakes, the courage, and yes, the hypocrisy too. Because if we're going to understand America, we need the whole truth. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been so angry about a tax that you were willing to go to war over it? That's where our story begins. Picture this. It's the 1760s. There is no America. Just 13 British colonies clinging to the eastern edge of a wild continent. About 2.5 million people. Farmers, merchants, lawyers, enslaved Africans and indigenous peoples, all living under the British flag. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. These colonists loved being British. They were proud of it. They'd just helped Britain crush the French in the 7 Years' War. British flags flew over their towns. They toasted King George III in their taverns. So what went wrong? That war Britain won? It cost them a fortune. Their national debt had doubled. So Parliament looked across the Atlantic and thought, well, we protected these colonists. They should help pay for it. Seems reasonable, right? That was their first mistake. You see, for over a century, these colonies had been running their own affairs. They had their own assemblies, made their own local laws. Sure, they were British subjects, but they were British subjects who'd gotten used to being left alone. Then came 1765, the Stamp Act. Now, this wasn't some massive tax. You just had to buy special stamped paper for legal documents, newspapers, even playing cards. But listen, it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. The colonists said, hold on. We have no representatives in Parliament. How can you tax us without our consent? I remember my grandfather telling me about his grandfather who lived through those times. He said people weren't just angry. They were furious. In Boston, they hung effigies of tax collectors from trees. In New York, they ransacked the governor's house. A phrase started appearing everywhere, scratched into walls, printed in newspapers, shouted in taverns. No taxation without representation. The British? They were completely baffled. From their perspective, all British subjects were virtually represented in Parliament, whether they voted or not. The colonists weren't buying it. Britain backed down. They repealed the Stamp Act. Victory. Right? Wrong. The very same day, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, asserting they had the right to make laws for the colonies. In all cases, whatsoever. It was like a parent telling a teenager, fine, you don't have to do this specific chore, but don't you ever forget, I'm still in charge here. That didn't sit well. Not well at all. Over the next few years, Parliament tried new taxes, the Townshend Acts, glass, paint, paper, tea. And the colonists? They fought back with their wallets. Women's groups called the Daughters of Liberty organized spinning bees, making their own cloth rather than buying British textiles. Think about that. Housewives waging economic warfare with spinning wheels. But Boston? Boston was always the troublemaker. The British sent 4,000 troops to keep order in a city of only 16,000 people. Imagine that. 1 soldier for every 4 civilians. You had young British soldiers, far from home, standing around with loaded muskets while angry colonists hurled insults and snowballs. And worse, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. On March 5th, 1770, it exploded. A crowd gathered around some British soldiers near the customs house. The mob grew aggressive. Someone rang a fire bell, bringing more people running. The soldiers were surrounded, scared. being pelted with chunks of ice and clubs. Then someone, to this day, nobody knows exactly what happened, but shots rang out. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead in the snow, blood staining the white streets of Boston red. The propagandists got to work immediately. Paul Revere, yes, that Paul Revere, created an engraving showing British soldiers firing in perfect formation into a peaceful crowd. Was it accurate? No. Did it spread like wildfire? Absolutely. The Boston Massacre became a rallying cry. Now here's something that tells you everything about the kind of men who would build America. John Adams, who would later become our second president, defended those British soldiers in court. People thought he was crazy. His own friends turned on him. But Adams believed in the rule of law, even when it was unpopular. 6 of the soldiers were acquitted. 2 received minor punishments. Adams said later that defending those soldiers was one of the finest things he ever did. That's the kind of complicated integrity that would help build America. For a while after that, things calmed down. Britain repealed most of the Townshend taxes, but they kept one, the tax on tea, just to maintain the principle that they had the right to tax the colonies. That tea tax? It would prove to be the spark that lit the fire. Fast forward to 1773. The British East India Company was sitting on millions of pounds of unsold tea, facing bankruptcy. Parliament came up with what they thought was a brilliant solution: the Tea Act. It actually lowered the price of tea by letting the company sell directly to the colonies. Even with the tax, British tea would now be cheaper than smuggled Dutch tea. Parliament thought, the colonists get cheap tea, the company is saved, and we maintain the tax. Everybody wins. The colonists saw right through it. This wasn't about helping them. This was about establishing Parliament's right to tax them, dressed up as a favor, and it would destroy colonial tea merchants' businesses. So on December 16th, 1773, something extraordinary happened. A group of men, some disguised as Mohawk Indians, though nobody was fooled, boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor. And for 3 hours, they dumped tea. 342 chests, 90,000 pounds of tea, worth about $1 million in today's money, into the harbor. They were remarkably disciplined about it. Nothing else was damaged. When someone tried to pocket some tea, the others made him empty his pockets. They even replaced a padlock they'd accidentally broken. But the tea? The tea went into the harbor, turning the water brown. I always think about that night. These weren't just rowdy troublemakers. These were merchants, artisans, respected members of the community. Some of them wealthy men with everything to lose. And they were willing to commit what was essentially an act of piracy because they believed their rights were being violated. That takes courage. Parliament's response was swift and brutal. They passed what they called the Coercive Acts. The colonists had another name for them: the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor, closed until the tea was paid for. Massachusetts's charter, revoked. The British governor now had near total control. British officials accused of crimes would be tried in Britain, not locally. And the Quartering Act required colonists to house British soldiers in their homes. It was meant to punish Massachusetts and scare the other 12 colonies into submission. It had the opposite effect. The other colonies didn't think, we'd better behave, or we're next. They thought, if Britain can do this to Massachusetts, they can do it to any of us. For the first time, the colonies started thinking of themselves not as separate entities, but as one people. In September 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia. 56 men from different backgrounds, different interests, different ideas. And Patrick Henry stood up and declared something that would change everything. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American. An American. Not British. American. The word hung in the air, and nothing would ever be the same. The delegates agreed to meet again in May 1775 if their grievances weren't addressed. King George III read their petition and declared, "These colonies are in rebellion." Both sides started preparing for war, stockpiling weapons, training militia, drawing lines in the sand. They were on a collision course, and neither was willing to swerve. What happened next? Well, folks, that's where things get really interesting. Because on April 19th, 1775, on a small town green in Massachusetts, someone fired a shot. Nobody knows who, but that single shot changed the world forever. I'm Bob, and this is just the beginning of how America was born. Next time, the shot heard round the world. Revolution, blood, and the night George Washington gambled everything on a frozen river. Until then, remember, history isn't just about dates and names. It's about real people making hard choices, just like we do today. Good night, folks.